Thanks for that. Man, that bio ate up most of my 45 minutes. So I want to avoid any awkwardness up front, so I'm going to let you know I'm not nervous. And the reason I say that is because I've heard when you're nervous, you're supposed to imagine everybody in the crowd naked. And so I don't want this to be awkward. All of you are fully clothed and you're going to stay that way. So that's my disclaimer. But don't take that as an insult, because I gotta say, one of the observations I've made right off the bat, Tom, this is without a doubt the most attractive crowd I've ever seen at any event. So you're welcome. Second, those $100 chips, don't gamble with them. Just take it and cash it in. They just gave you $100. Caesar's Palace does not need your money, okay? And speaking of, I think this is a very interesting venue. Especially when I'm coming up here to talk about things like cost containment, right? Cost containment. Think about it. I was looking this morning to have a coffee, okay? I don't know if any of you have already checked into your room or stayed overnight. I'm trying to have a coffee, the little Keurig machine, right? And I'm looking all over. I'm like, oh, is it in the bathroom? Is it in the closet? You know, you've been to the hotels, they hide the K-cup. It's like the most fun part of getting here. And then I see the sign, and it says the K-cups are in the minibar, and that you need to log onto the television, right, and click the food menu to find out how much the K-cups cost. All right? So I got to tell you, the reason why you picked this venue, and I think it's perfect, is it is definitely the closest to a hospital I have ever been without actually being in a hospital, right? All right. It's like, oh, you know, oh, maybe, and then, and you know, like, depending on who you are, right, when you arrive, they take you different places and charge you different amounts, and so it's been great. Although it's much nicer, and the food is way better. Just want to make sure our hosts hear that, otherwise they're going to kick me out. So, hi. Ron Peck, Executive Vice President with the Phia Group. Definitely want to respect everybody's time, and so I'm going to try and get through this. There's a giant digital clock counting down. It is the most intimidating thing I have ever seen in my entire life. But before we get into the good stuff, I need to ask up front, before you hear what I have to say and decide you don't like me, to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's very important. I've got a bit of a competition going with the CEO of my company. He's doubled down on me. He's got twice the number of connections as I do. I think it's because he sits there in the bathroom and he's just, you know, hitting connect to all of these people, and he's got a bunch of friends in Poland and whatever. He's got the whole country on his side. So I'm asking you, please, to help me. All right. We also have a podcast. For those of you who don't listen, shame on you. It's available on Google now also. I don't know. The people in charge of marketing, they've obviously got an Apple bias, you know. But anyway. And it's interesting because they say about podcasts, you're supposed to keep it to like 15 minutes or less or something like that, which apparently is all the rage, because I feel bad. All the other speakers are basically doing 15-minute podcasts. I looked at the schedule, and I've got 45 minutes. You know, it's an abundance of riches. Why do we do what we do at the Phia Group? Well, cost containment is sort of the overriding theme. And a lot of the things we're going to talk about today ultimately boil down to cost containment, even though people don't really think of it as cost containment. You hear all the time, people talk about healthcare and they use words like access, right? People need to have access to care. Or people talk about, oh, there are too many uninsured, right? There are people who can't afford insurance. And these are things that are much more socially acceptable terms, right? We have to help people. We have to create access, right? These are positive words, building words. We have to provide insurance, right? Those are words where we're adding, whereas cost containment is a negative term, right? Even though cost is a bad thing, cost containment, it's got this negative connotation almost. So you don't really hear it out there. But everything I just mentioned ultimately is furthered by cost containment, right? If things cost less, more people can afford it. More people can afford it, you gain access, assuming the providers of healthcare can continue providing healthcare. And we're going to talk about that, and I'm glad you started the conversation regarding Medicare for All, because that's a big one. Today, we're basically going to cover three general topics. Okay, the first are things that are getting a lot of coverage, but are actually much less meaningful to you than you would think, based on what you're hearing. The second is you're hearing about it, it's going to impact you, let's discuss it. And then the third are things you hear nothing about, but you definitely should pay attention to those topics. So that's how it's going to be split up. And before we jump in, I got to tell you, and again, when I do presentations, I'm not the person who says, you know, who's from this place or who's experienced that thing by a show of hands, because I've been in the crowd and the last thing you want to do is participate, right? You just want to sit and listen. You don't like it when the television talks to you. So I'm not going to ask anybody to raise hands, but I'm going to assume most of you are not from the Las Vegas area. I'm going to assume the majority of you flew in on an airplane, and I'm going to assume most of you arrived here either by taxi cab or Uber or some other rideshare. And I myself, I was in the cab, and without fail, you always end up in that awkward conversation where they ask things that really, I don't even know why they care, right? If I were in their shoes, I wouldn't care. Like, oh, where are you from? Like, oh, Boston, Massachusetts. I know somebody from Boston. Oh, it's cold in Boston. Oh, you must love it cold. Oh, it must be too hot here. It's just the same conversation every time, right? God bless them. And then they ask the next question, which means even less to them than where you're from, which is what you do, right? They always say, what do you do? Right? And this is when I wish that I was, you know, like a professional athlete or something cool like that, right? And someone's like, oh yeah, health benefits, you know, health insurance. Lame. It's so lame, right? And every year, that's when the conversation dies, so I guess I should be glad. I just want to be left alone, man. But this time, driving in, the driver started to have a conversation with me about healthcare and about health insurance. And I don't know about the rest of you, but the issues with which we deal are definitely becoming front-page material. And I've always argued that healthcare is comprised of the 3 Ps: the provider, the patient, and the payer. And when the ACA was released, there was such a focus on the payer. It was all about insurance. And it didn't work. I'm not saying it was a mistake, but I think it was an incomplete effort because we didn't focus enough on the patient and the provider. And that's definitely starting to make itself known today. And that's why all the conversation now, you know, whether it's pharmaceutical company panels in front of, you know, Congress, right? Or oh, this article just came out in the New York Times about, did you know that hospitals charge private payers many times more than Medicare? It's like this was like big news. Yeah, we've known that for decades, but nobody listened because nobody cared. But now, the provider and the patient are part of the conversation, and that's why I think this is becoming a hot topic. Now, Tom, you mentioned the Chase, Berkshire, Amazon effort, and when this was first announced that they were kind of coming together and doing this, a lot of people in our industry were saying, oh, is this the end of our business? Are they going to replace us? Are they going to change how healthcare is provided? And I don't want you to make the mistake of thinking that I don't admire what, and the company's called Haven, what they're doing. I very much do admire it. They're leveraging steerage, which is something I've argued for a long time, and much less heralded, but just as potentially fantastic, is also what Walmart's been doing with its steerage, and you hear about that in the news. But right now, their focus is changing how healthcare is accessed and paid for their plan. This is not an alternative to the plans that all of our groups and all of our employees and employers are utilizing today. Could it create a blueprint for the future? Maybe. But it's not urgent as far as news is concerned for you today. So keep an eye on it to gain inspiration, not because it's going to put you out of business in the next 2 years, okay? Can't come up here and talk about noise without Medicare for all, right? Medicare for all at the federal level is just a political slogan, all right? That's the bottom line. Even the people who claim that it's something they support, even they would agree that at the federal level, it's not going to happen. And that's why you already see people cashing in their chips, right? And before I go any further, I think now's an opportune time to announce my candidacy for the 2020 election also. So, yeah, buddy, no way, my wife will kill me. The people who are interested in this concept of Medicare for all, right, a single-payer system, have started to reduce the scope of their focus down to state level. And this is something I've been hearing about with much more frequency. And if you're going to focus on something, focus on this. Is single-payer efforts at the state level. As I mentioned before, based out of Boston, Massachusetts, where they're talking about a single-payer option, okay, a single-payer system specifically for Massachusetts. State. And even that's not realistic. So what are they doing? They're talking about, instead of a single payer, a public option on the exchange, which, if you think about it, was something that had been brought up during the ACA's early days and was shot down. But now it's coming back up again. And if you didn't see the news, Washington State just announced that they're going to have a public option on their exchange. Hey, no problem, competition is good, right? Yeah, all right, just another option for the people. And they've got this brilliant idea. Are you ready? They're going to make their plan affordable. You know how? They're going to pay providers a % of Medicare. You ever hear that? I bet not. For the win, government. But fear not, those of you who think that the hospitals will end up looking like this, because they're being underpaid. Because as we all know, if a hospital accepted Medicare rates for everyone, they'd be bankrupt in a week, which is why they have to offset Medicare losses by overcharging private payers. I hear that on the phone every day from hospitals when I'm negotiating out-of-network rates with these hospitals and I'm trying to avoid balance billing of the patient. That's what I'm told. We can't do anything about it because we need to make up the balance because of the money we're losing on Medicaid and Medicare. So fortunately, Washington's come up with a solution. They're going to pay Medicare plus 60%. That'll solve it. How many times have I been on the phone with a hospital and I've asked them to take Medicare plus 80%, 200% Medicare, and they still say no way because their charge is 600% Medicare, 800% Medicare, and they're going to balance bill that patient. And what's worse is the courts support it. Every case involving balance billing supports the provider's right to balance bill and does not allow the patient to argue that what they paid was reasonable and appropriate. And yet, the state can come in and do it. And what's going to happen if that happens? A legal RBP plan where balance billing is outlawed. I mean, seriously, if I wasn't talking to you, I'd want to jump on board. The last thing I'll mention as far as that's concerned is that these plans are not going to be run by a municipal entity, by the government. They are going to outsource to private carriers. Who those carriers are, I don't know, but it's something to keep an eye on. But at the federal level, it's not going to happen. You might recall during the election, one of the big talking points for President Trump was this idea of cross-border competition. Sounds great, no idea what that means. And it started to crystallize when we saw the changes being made to the association health plans. For those of you who don't know, association health plans, multiple individual plans band together, form a single plan. They have to share a geographic area and a business purpose. Note the word "and." You have to meet both criteria. The president comes in, swaps out the word "and" for the word "or." That's more or less what happened. Now, different employers, different businesses can band together, form a plan if they're in the same geographic area, or employers in the same industry across different borders can come together, form an association health plan. Hooray! You know? Now, let me tell you right now, less than a month ago, a court declared that it was unconstitutional and put the word "and" back in, so it doesn't even matter, right? But even at the time, there's articles out there about how this is really not going to have much of an impact. You know why? Because those cross-border association health plans had to comply with the MIWA laws in every single state where one of their member plans is located. Huge pain, nobody wanted to deal with it. We'll talk about being within the same geographic area later and what that looks like now. But before we get there, hot topic, transparency, right? Woo, it's going to save us all, right? Transparency to the rescue. Now, don't get it wrong. I am a big fan of transparency. I am an honest guy. I'm being transparent about transparency right now. But transparency just regarding price in and of itself, in my mind, is incomplete at best, right? So you see the sticker price. How many of you pay sticker price? So what does it mean? You know, maybe it lets you comparison shop, but who's doing that with hospitals? So, you know, CMS's movement to put, you know, have all these hospitals put their charge masters in some hidden HTML deep inside their web pages somewhere. It's just sticker prices, right? And even if you know the actual price, who cares if it's someone else's money, right? Look at that. Yankees. Did you know that at Yankee Stadium they have a sushi bar? Ugh, I hate the Yankees. Look at this. I'm going to, right, the Bronx roll, you know. Let me have some edamame while I watch the game. Right? If it's not my money, why do I care what the price even is? Skin in the game, right? You hear about that all the time. Well, don't worry, Ron. We got a solution for that, right? High deductibles and bigger patient shares and, you know, carrots and sticks and California rolls and whatever. We're going to get some skin in the game. Okay, skin in the game. Somebody goes into the pharmacy. They need some painkiller, right? Over the counter. You got the brand and you got the store brand, right? The generic. The price is right there. Price transparency. Look at the labels. Same drug, right? Quality transparency. I don't know about you, but even my plan doesn't cover the cost of my aspirin, right? Skin in the game. I'm paying for it. People still buy the brand. So don't tell me that transparency, people just magically make the right decision when they know what the price is or they know that what they're getting, because it's not true. And the proof is in the pudding, right? I feel so bad for, and I wrote a blog entry about this, I feel bad for JCPenney's, where they said no more sales, no more discounts, the price is the fair price. And they went bankrupt because people want inflated rates minus a discount. That's what they wanted, right? So much for transparency. Take your transparency, I want to win, right? How about this, right? Payless. They're going out of business now, too. Paylessy, you remember this story? Where they went and they took their $20 sneakers and they put them in this boutique store and they put the price up around $600 instead of $20, right? And people were coming in and they're buying it. And they have these fashionistas on video going like, oh, look at the craftsmanship. Ugh. You know? The reason is people generally, when they see a higher price, assume it must cost more for a reason. You ever hear the saying, get what you pay for? Of course you have. Now, we know that's not true in healthcare, but it's ingrained in people's minds. So until people actually understand the way healthcare works and truly value quality over price, rather than price as an indicator of quality, you're not going to get there. Now, I mentioned association health plans and geographic area. And between the two AHP options, same type of companies across state lines or different employers within a geographic area, the latter was much more popular and, if not widely adopted, at least discussed. And what was interesting was hospitals got in on the game. Hospitals. Different health systems and hospital systems in geographic areas, many of whom have a self-funded health plan for their own employees, began talking about creating association health plans with other employer plans in their geographic area. Now, since this rule, this AHP rule that President Trump issued has been reversed by a district court in DC, and I imagine they'll appeal, but let's assume that they're going to lose, you now need to do both. You can't just be in the same geographic area, you have to be the same type of business. So that idea is scrapped. And yet, I'm still hearing from hospital systems today that are talking about, instead of forming an AHP with other plans in their area, inviting employers to jettison their plan and sign their employees up for the hospital's plan. So instead of an AHP, it's a hospital plan or a health system plan, where the provider and the payer are one. Good? Bad? I don't know. Happening? Yes. But I tell you one thing, Where some people see a threat, I see opportunity. Because these plans are going to need somebody to advise them. These plans are going to need somebody to service them. These plans are going to need somebody to process their claims. And the same with Medicare for All or state-based plans. Ultimately, these entities think they've got a great idea, but don't know what it takes to actually execute. So be aware. Surprise balance billing, right? This is a hot topic. You want to talk about hot, scorching, Vegas hot, right? I like to talk about balance billing versus surprise billing, where if you think about it, right? So all brown squirrels are squirrels, but not all squirrels are brown squirrels, okay? All surprise billing is balance billing, but not all balance billing is surprise billing, all right? Balance billing happens anytime there's a balance between what the provider received and what they charged, as long as there's no contract to do away with the balance. Okay? If there's nothing preventing it, they go ahead and they balance bill, regardless of the reason. Surprise billing is a subset of balance billing, and it's catching a lot of attention. And you can imagine why. It happens in one of two circumstances. Emergency, where you had no choice, you were rushed to the nearest facility, okay, most convenient. And two, you go in-network, and one of the providers at the in-network facility is out of network. You know the story, right? The anesthesiologist or surgeon or something like that is out of network even though the facility is in. And as a result, you're balance billed despite the fact that you did everything in your power to avoid it. This is something that is bipartisan and on everyone's radar. How do we deal with surprise billing? The problem is, and this is what's killing me, is it's such an easy solution, right? The silver bullet is right there in front of you. Just make the plan pay the balance. Oh, it's fixed. That's what I'm hearing, right? These rules. But you know, if they think it's not fair, let's do baseball arbitration. I don't know if you've heard of baseball arbitration. Basically, what that is, the two sides of a dispute come in, each with a proposal, and if they can't work it out themselves, the arbitrator picks one of the two. They're not allowed to do the whole Solomon cut the baby thing, right? They have to pick one or the other. And who do you think the arbitrator is going to side with more often than not, right? So ultimately, the solution to balance billing is to just force the payer to pay more. It's funny because I actually saw in Massachusetts a proposal for avoidance or eliminating surprise billing, and what it said was that if somebody goes out of network in an emergency or an out-of-network provider at an in-network facility, the payer is allowed to pay Medicare plus 10%. It's nice, right? That's section 1. Section 2. If balance billing ensues, the plan must cover the balance. And the last thing I'll say about this, my buddy, right, art of the deal, if two parties enter a negotiation and one must, by law, have a deal before they leave, and the other can get up from the table and leave without a deal, the one that can leave has the advantage. You know this, right? So unless there's equal negotiating power, it's not going to work. So surprise balance billing, when you hear, oh yeah, they're going to fix balance billing, they're going to get those hospitals, understand the solution being thrown around more often than not is to just have the plan pay more. So we're going to have to figure that out, right? One of the legal concepts that I've been a huge supporter of, and I've actually seen courts all over the country at the lowest level enforce this, and then at appeal get overturned, is this concept of quantum meruit, where basically, if you don't have a deal in place ahead of time, and I pay you something and it's not enough, you need to prove the value of what you're providing through evidence. Not a charge master, but evidence. You need to prove what it costs you to provide the care. You need to prove what other people actually pay you that you accept as payment in full. You need to prove what other providers similar to you accept as payment in full. And all this information goes into a bucket, shake, 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 out comes a fair price. And that's something that on an individual basis we try to do from a negotiation standpoint. Legally, in all other walks of life, this concept of quantum meruit is a legal tour de force. The example I have right there, right, painting, is that if somebody comes and they paint my home, and I know they're doing it, but it turns out we never agreed on a price, and they want to charge me $10,000, and I want to pay them $100, and let's say the fair price based on all those factors is $1,000, they're required to accept the $1,000, but not in healthcare. And when efforts have been made to use quantum merit to avoid a balance, they were overturned, which really makes you think. These are issues that are not getting airtime, but probably should. All right? And this is where maybe you need to focus. The concept of reducing cost in a broad, sweeping manner, just reducing all the spending in one shot, right? Medicare-based pricing, boom, across the board, is not always well received, and it's difficult to do. So instead, focus on the little wins, right? It's like they say, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. One of the areas where there is extreme cost is dialysis. You know this. And there are federal laws in place where if someone has ESRD and certain factors are met, balance billing is avoided or at least reduced. On top of that, many of the networks that in the past were a hurdle to carving out dialysis are starting to come around. Because I think even they realize that this is an albatross around their neck. So what do I mean by that? Historically, a ERISA, self-funded benefit plan, has a fiduciary duty, it's so powerful, to enforce the terms of the plan document. And if I put in that plan document that the plan will pay Medicare, care, plus 50% for dialysis, then I'm not only going to do it, I'm required to do it. But the problem is, if I sign a contract that says I'm going to pay the dialysis provider whatever they charge, minus a discount, I'm bound by that contract as well. So as a fiduciary and a plan administrator, I do what the plan says. But as a private entity, an employer, a broker, a TPA, whomever it is that signed the contract, if you don't pay per that contract, it's a breach of contract. Now you're going to say to me, but Ron, doesn't that mean the plan and the contract contradict? Yes, someone screwed up. If I tell you I'll sell you my car, and I tell you I'll sell you my car, and I only have one car, one of you's getting the car, the other's got a breach of contract action against me. I shouldn't enter into two deals when I can't enter into both. That's not allowed. This is an example. However, that network agreement that contradicted with the carve-out, more and more networks are starting to consider carving dialysis as a service or dialysis providers out of the network. If you can do that, then the carve-out works. There is no contradicting contract, and you've succeeded, at least in this instance. I mentioned already that the silver bullet for balanced billing and things like that is this idea that, hey, just make the plan pay for it, right? And that's not a unique attitude. And that, more than anything else, is what scares me, is there's this attitude that just money grows on trees, right? It always makes me laugh. People say, oh, Medicare for all, it's going to be great. Like it's free health care. No, listen, more of my friends are surgeons and doctors than lawyers. Okay, lawyers hate lawyers. Tim, you're the exception, buddy. I like doctors, man. If I hurt myself, like they could just fix me right there, right? They don't know what they're charging. They don't know what things cost, right? But they know that they need to be paid. So if they're not being paid, right, they're not going to work for free. I'm telling you, they're not going to work for free. So they need to be paid. So the money's got to come from somewhere. Where's it coming from? And you hear it's funded by tax dollars. That's what blows my mind. They basically say, Ron, great news. We eliminated your insurance, no more premium. Awesome. And they're like, Ron, great news. We're raising your taxes by 150%. So it's just coming out of one pocket instead of the other. That's what I don't get. This idea that it's somehow free. And you know what the argument is? Net, the reduction in premium will be more than the increase in taxes because they're going to force providers, like I mentioned in Washington State, to accept Medicare plus 60%. And I guess the moral of the story is in a lot of the things I'm talking about here, whether it's balanced billing or negotiating claims or carve-outs or anything like that, the conversation is between us and the provider. And if I'm a hospital CEO or COO or CFO, and you're coming to me and you're saying, please just accept 200% Medicare for this one service, please, don't balance bill the patient. How they don't look at the news coming out of Washington and say, of course I'll take that. Better than the alternative. How that conversation isn't taking place is beyond me. I just don't get it. And maybe there's this attitude that this single payer or Medicare for all or public option isn't going to happen. And if we weather the storm, meaning the provider community, we'll get through it and we can continue just doing it the way we always have. And I just don't know. I mean, by the time these alternative options that are worse for the provider than it is for us eventually happen, is it going to be too late? Because by then, most of the plan members and employers are going to say, hey, more coverage for less cost, go there. And now all of our influence and our steerage is gone. So if we don't get strategic now and force the provider to see the light, nothing's going to happen. Opioid epidemic. I bet you didn't see this one coming, right? Right? Thousands upon thousands of people, victims of the opioid epidemic. As an attorney, I'm going to take my business hat right off and I'm going to put my attorney hat on. My concern, has anybody ever heard of a dram shop case or no? I think Tiger Woods, his bartender just died in a car accident and now Tiger Woods is being sued, right? Same idea. Where if as a bar, right, I serve somebody too much alcohol, let's say, right? And they end up in a car accident or they're injured or something like that, right? I may ultimately be responsible because it was foreseeable that this person was going to harm themselves or someone else, and I enabled it, right? And I can see that legal concept starting to trickle down into healthcare and the opioid epidemic, right? As people look for fingers to point at different people, already you see the pharmaceutical companies, they were first on the list, right? You see the physicians that are prescribing the drug, now they're on the list. If I'm a benefit plan, and I'm processing claims for these drugs, and I'm not raising a red flag, should I have been aware? Is there some culpability there? I don't know, right? If I'm a benefit plan sponsor, I'm designing a plan, and I don't include coverage for alternative treatment, so that if somebody is in pain, there's something else they could at least try before they try this. Have I failed? I don't know. But if you care about this issue, maybe those are questions you need to ask. Just saying. So I believe at this point I have about 5-10 minutes if anybody has any questions or comments or anything like that. Otherwise, I bought you a little extra time there. There you go.
If anyone does have a question, remember to use the microphones because we won't be able to hear it. Otherwise, I've got two questions for you, Ron.
Oh, boy.
One is, it's not really a question necessarily. I guess it's just a point.
All right, I'll just listen then.
You talked about dialysis.
I did.
And for those of you who have experienced that, we're literally seeing discounts of 90% from billed charges, courtesy of our friends from Renologic, who I think are over in that area right there. So go during table time, go talk to Renologic about that. And yes, you can buy me a drink later. But you said networks are now considering allowing a carve-out of dialysis providers.
Sure.
So we can do that kind of stuff. Not everybody, right? What about Cigna, Aetna, Blues?
Oh yeah, there's still pushback. But depending on the size of the plan, the steerage that you could bring to bear, the arguments you can make, is it happening right now? No. Are they starting to have the dialogue? Yes. I think the writing is on the wall.
Yeah.
I would still argue you need to work with a specialist. especially because Medicare Secondary Payer Act and all these laws that are intertwined in dialysis and ESRD and discrimination, right? So the problem is you got to carve out all dialysis, but Medicare Secondary Payer only protects ESRD, and if you target ESRD, it's discriminating anyway. Point being, there's a lot of complexity there, so it's not just as easy as saying, boom, just do it. But it's feasible. It's one area that you need to look at.
Yep. Okay, great. My second question is another statement. First of all, I made it very clear to every one of our speakers that they're welcome to dress business casual. So in the interest of assuming that this is your business casual, when you go home at night, do you like take off your coat and then put on a little sweater and sit down with a... Does your dog bring your slippers?
Yeah. I've got a hoodie footy with a tie.
Okay, yeah. That's what I thought.
It's nice. Right, it's a bit of a choking hazard, but it snaps off. It's okay.
Oh, there we go. So who's got a question? Anybody? Oh, we do. Greg, over here. Pay attention, Greg.
I like the pity questions.
Yeah,
you don't have to guilt trip people.
Someone's got to answer a question.
So regarding the opioid issue,
yes.
You took off your attorney hat and took off your business hat and put on your attorney hat.
Sure.
What's your response with your attorney hat on? Or, excuse me, your business hat on?
Sure. So I actually think it's good for business, right? I saw one of the other bullets was people like case studies, yeah? Mm-hmm. All right. Mm-hmm. Case study time. My company, we're an employer. We've got, almost 200 employees at this point on the plan with their families. We actually cover acupuncture. And we've had more than one instance where somebody would have been prescribed an opioid, a painkiller, and they opted to try acupuncture instead. And without going into too great detail, in all three instances, they opted not to fill the prescription and had great success with the acupuncture. It's not required, even in Massachusetts, shocker, right? We were able to take that and promote that so that when we're looking to hire and people are saying, what's your health plan like? This is one of the examples that we're able to provide. And just in case you're not aware, Massachusetts is one of the states that's most heavily hit right now by the opioid issue. And so it resonates with a lot of people. So from a business perspective, and additionally, cost was actually less expensive. So it was kind of a win-win. I lost track of the wins.
Many wins.
It was windy.
It's very windy. Exactly. Oh, another question down here.
Hi. Nice presentation. Can you just talk briefly about the ability to carve out, say, a drug? Let's take a drug like Humira.
Sure.
$60,000 drug. Carve it out, purchase it internationally, and we for a fraction of the cost. Just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Great question. So one of the issues that we always encounter when it comes to carving out either a specific type of treatment or medication is it's allowed in certain circumstances if done the proper way. The issue that you run into is if that treatment or drug is closely tied to a condition or an illness or a disease, the argument is made that even though the plan is carving out a specific drug, it's choosing not to treat a particular condition. And that brings up issues of discrimination. So you need to be careful to make sure that, one of the biggest issues people run into is they don't think to carve something out until somebody on the plan already has that disease, and then they can argue that you're discriminating against me. So if you're a plan, the best time to do something like carve out a specialty drug or carve out dialysis is before somebody's actually using it. It's just it's usually not on people's radar. So that's a discrimination issue. The next issue then becomes, well, let's say hypothetically, and again I mentioned that there's limitations on how you can do it, but let's say you follow the steps appropriately and you carve out a given drug or treatment, and you avoid any issue of discrimination. However, you still want to provide care or coverage for that individual employee, their family member, whomever. You don't want to just send them off to sea on a raft and let them fend for themselves. So you start to look at alternative means of coverage, things like international drug purchasing, which is a very hot topic right now, right? One of the things that I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding regarding the legality of drug importation versus medical tourism. If you leave the country to receive treatment and it's entirely outside the country, that's international medical tourism. And I use international because you also see domestic medical tourism taking place as well. If you're going to do that, just word to the wise, make sure your benefit plan doesn't exclude treatment occurring outside the United States. Seen that way too many times. All right, so that's all about implementation. You can do that. If your goal is to import drugs or have someone go out of the country and then bring drugs back with them, the issue that a few different vendors are running into with the FDA now relates to this concept of selective enforcement. And the best example I can give of selective enforcement, if you're on the interstate and the posted speed limit is 55 miles per hour, and you're doing 60, are you speeding? I know I promised I wouldn't ask people for feedback, so we'll just say yes, okay? Yes, technically you're speeding. Do you anticipate that a police officer is gonna pull you over? If you're not me, the answer is no. If you are me, bad luck, right? Especially if you're near a college. Speed traps, it's the worst upstate New York, forget it. Anyway, so that's selective enforcement, all right? Is there a rule? Are you violating the rule? Yes. Are they choosing to enforce it or not? No. As long as you're operating within certain accepted parameters, right? Everybody knows once you're beyond 10 miles over the limit, now you're starting to push it, right? This is just general knowledge. If you're the patient, not the plan, not a vendor, and you're importing drugs only for your use and only a certain volume, a certain amount, it's still technically illegal. But there is an FAQ that was released by the DOL and the FDA, and I think HHS got in on it too. You know, hey, all these acronyms, right? Basically saying, if as long as you stay within these parameters, right now we're choosing not to enforce it. But the problem is, you can't get people to do something like that without some knowledgeable entity, whether it's the employer or the plan administrator or an advisor or a vendor, providing that information. And these agencies see that entity providing that information down to the patient, and they say, you're trying to do an end run, you're using them as your agent, but this is still your enterprise. And that's why you saw some pushback by the FDA. So, at the same time, what kind of plans are the most frequent, I'll say egregious offenders? Municipalities. So it's little state and local government up against the federal government, which is a recurring theme across the board. Yep. So I hope that at least gave some information.
All right, just last thing, because we're just about to turn red here. Case study, in your plan, you buy diapers. Yes, you still do that?
Well, I don't personally,
but for your employees?
For me, yes.
Tell them the effect
Sure.
of that.
So cost containment, basically one of the last issues I'll tell you about. Most contracts, network contracts, they prohibit you from loving one child more than your other children. And what I mean by that is you absolutely, positively are supposed to show preference to in-network versus out, right? You're supposed to steer people in-network. But once they're in-network, you're not supposed to prefer one in-network facility over another. But that's the plan. That's whomever it is that's signing that network contract. At my company, the employer, which is an independent legal entity from the plan, you've got the plan here and you've got the employer here. The employer, on our own, went and did research and identified the best facilities in our geographic area from a quality standpoint for delivering babies. And then we looked at the cost data and identified the ones that did the best for the least cost. Cross-referenced the two and identified 4 or 5 centers of excellence. And we tell our employees, and this is not in our health plan because this would be a violation of our network contract, but as an employee benefit, like a holiday bonus, we tell the employee, if you pick one of these centers of excellence to deliver your baby, you get diapers and wipes for a year. It's taxable because it's not a plan benefit, it's an employee benefit. But obviously you're still getting out like a bandit. So that program was actually, it was in the Boston Globe a few years ago. It's still up and running. We've got way too many babies in our office, but it's actually worked out really, really well.
There we go. All right, great. We're out of time. Go see Ron. Tim Calendar's also with them, but thanks. It was great.
No.